the last few weeks we've been getting pretty leery on motorbikes, you know, getting sideways on the Triumph Explorer launch, doing wheelies and some track action with the Hyper Motard. Susie's just been channeling her inner dominatrix on the Scrambler 62 launch. So we thought it was time to slow things down a bit, be a bit more laid back. And so we're here in Portugal to ride one of the bikes that we're super excited to get on ever since we saw it at the bike shed in London. And it's the Triumph Thruxton R, and just look at it. So that was just me breathing in the sexiness. So I spent a bit of time on the old Thruxton and then about 15 or 20 miles on this bike, and those 20 miles are all I've really needed to see that this thing is a totally different animal to that old bike. So the old Thruxton used an 865cc air-cooled parallel twin, and it felt somewhat underpowered for the way that it looked, you know, because it looks like a quick bike and you could stroke it along at a decent pace, but you really needed to work the engine. This new one still uses a parallel twin, but it's now a 1200cc water-cooled engine, and it is a totally different animal. It's in a different league altogether. This thing is not just quick for a cafe racer or quick for a retro bike. This thing is quick full stop. Triumph have made a massive effort to bring this bike up to date and yet still retain that authentic retro feel of the old Thruxton. So it's littered with modern components, and yet you still get that cool cafe racer vibe. So it's got a magnetic tank strap, a polished top yoke, there's brushed steel everywhere. The water-cooled system is really cleverly concealed in it. So there's a tiny radiator that you can't see any pipes anywhere. There's the air-cooled fins to make it look like an air-cooled bike. It's just cool. As I said, we've only done about 20 miles today so far, so we're going to stop peacocking around the harbour because everyone's looking at us, although I have been enjoying that. Put some miles in under a belt, go burn some fuel and find out how this thing really rides. So this morning I had two different bikes lined up. One was the Thruxton and one was this R version. Naturally I beelined towards this bike because, you know, it's got all the bells and whistles, but I had a bit of a slap on the wrist from Triumph because they didn't want me saying that the Thruxton was the base model. What they're saying is that the Thruxton is not the base model and the R is not necessarily supposed to be a more desirable machine. They're supposed to be different slants on the same sort of thing. And so this R model is obviously the sportier slant. So it's got fully adjustable Öhlins rear suspension, Showa big piston forks, also fully adjustable, and those are proper performance forks. They're off the GX 1000, they're off the old ZX10. There's massive Brembo discs, Brembo calipers, Brembo master cylinder for proper braking. You will not need anything else. And then there's the engine. So the engine in this Thruxton is basically a tuned version of the new engine found in the T120 Bonneville, except it's been modified a bit. So you get a different airbox, you get a lighter crankshaft, so it spins up a lot faster than that Bonnie. It's got higher compression ratio, and the result of all that is you get 82 foot-pound of torque and just under 100 horsepower, around 96, 97 brake. So compared to that old Thruxton, this thing's up 62% on torque, 41% on power, but it's where it makes the power. At 4,500 RPM, 68% up on power. 68, that's basically two old Thruxtons bummed into one for this. This thing is in a totally different league. So we're doing a lot of hanging around in urban areas this morning because I guess that's where a lot of people are going to be using this bike. But we're now going to go head up into the hills, let this thing find some open roads, let the engine purr, because from where I'm standing, this thing looks like it's going to be a bit of a weapon when you get it up to speed. how do these two bikes actually compare? Well, the front end on the Non-R is totally different. So for example, the tyres are different. You've got Pirelli Angel GTs versus the Rosso Corsas. So that's much more suited to road riding. These are a bit stickier when the weather's nice and sunny like it is today. The brakes are different. You get basically less braking performance. The discs are different. There's smaller Nissin calipers. There's a different radial master cylinder. The braking setup on this bike is superb. Not bad on this one, just not quite as ferocious as this. Then you get right way up forks with these nice fork gaiters, more of a styling thing that. The suspension at the rear is different, so you get adjustable suspension for preload, but there's no compression or rebound damping. So there's also a few styling differences. So for example, the grips on this bike are chunkier. You get different indicators. These are chromed out versus the black ones on the R. You get different exhaust entirely. So that's not a performance thing, that is purely for styling. This one's chromed out versus the brushed steel on the R. So this is gonna blow up nicely once you get some heat into it. Then the rear sets are different. There's also a different seat, which is leather instead of the Alcantara style finish on the R. Been parked up literally like 3 minutes and it gets a crowd straight away. Either that or they're trying to work out how to steal it. So we've covered some really nice coastal roads this afternoon. It's pretty chilly, it's pretty windy, but we found some twisty stuff to test this bike on. Now, obviously we've covered the fact that the engine feels like a massive leap ahead over the old bike, but so does the handling. Now that might seem pretty obvious given the fact that you've got modern suspension. You know, you've got the Showa big piston forks, the fully adjustable Olin suspension, and all the other tweaks that Triumph have made to this bike. But I tell you what, you can get a serious lick on this thing when you're really on the throttle. If you really push it, you do get to that performance envelope. The front end starts shaking a bit, the rear squats down a bit, but it makes you feel like a proper old school cafe racer, just tucking behind that top yoke, and the bike's actually moving around. It's really engaging. And when you are really pushing this bike to the limit, that's where the modern touches come into play. You've got the electronics package. So you've got a traction control system, you've got ABS, and then you've got 3 different rider modes: road, rain and sport. Now all those 3 rider modes, they're adjustable on the fly or at stop, however you like, and they don't actually affect the traction control or the ABS. All they are is a power delivery thing. So it changes the map on the bike. So in rain, you've got a really soft power delivery, sport's more aggressive, road's in the middle, but they don't change how quickly the traction control intervenes or how quickly the ABS is. It's just simply that throttle map. One of my favorite things about this bike is the way it mixes modern componentry with classic design. It's just such a gorgeous thing to look at. It's got spoke wheels, brushed steel exhaust system, the finish on the dials is gorgeous. Even things like the engine covers are such a nice thing to look at. So I've done about 150 miles on this bike today, and so far it has totally won my heart over. I think it's a gorgeous thing to look at. Everyone's staring at it in the street. It sounds amazing when you go through little small roads. It bounces off the buildings. It sounds fantastic. It handles really well. One thing I'm not too keen on is the comfort. This seat is great to look at. It's got an Alcantara style finish. It's really well designed, but my bum is so sore. It is really hard. It's like a plank of wood. And then the riding position. It's not a death rack, but it's not the most comfortable thing. You know, this is definitely not a touring bike. If you spent 7 or 8 hours in the saddle in a day, you'd know about it. So even though I think this bike is pretty damn stunning, it is the type of machine that people are gonna wanna customize. They're gonna wanna modify it and make it their own. And so Triumph, as well as having released a whole line of accessories, have also released these things called inspiration kits. And it's the same thing that they did for the Street Twin, except there's obviously different ones for the Thruxtons. So there's a track racer kit, there's a cafe racer kit, and they come with things like lower clip-on handlebars. The track racer comes with a massive dustbin fairing, and there's also a performance kit that's going to be available soon for this bike with different cams, a decat exhaust system, and a different throttle map to make this thing even more of a beast. So these two new machines come in a number of different colours. It's £10,400 for the standard bike, and they come in green, white and black. The R version costs £11,700 and comes in the silver, red or a matte black. So it's only 1,300 quid more for all the performance upgrades that you get on this R version. But as I said before, these are totally different machines. Even though they're both Thruxtons, it's just a totally different slant on the same sort of thing. So before, when you bought a Thruxton or a Bonneville, there was somewhat of a compromise. You know, they had great styling, but the engine was a bit slower. Now, you've got this amazing attention to detail, an incredible engine to boot, and then this amazing, iconic styling. Hats off to Triumph, because these two bikes just make you feel so special.